Quiet on set. Speed and action.
I know it was you, Fredo. You broke my heart.
You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow.
Welcome to the Foot and Friends on Film podcast, discussing everything about cinema. Now here's your host, Nick Baylor.
What's in the bar?
Houston, we have a problem.
You can't handle the truth.
I'll got what you got, crazy.
Welcome to the official podcast of Foot and Friends on Film.com, where we discuss everything about cinema. I'm your host, Nick Baylor. On today's episode, part 2 in our ongoing series about the greatest performances in cinematic history. Today we're focusing on best leading actor performances. The top 15 as chosen by our own John H. Foote. It's going to be a good one. We're going to have 2 more on supporting performances coming up, so take your seats and grab your popcorn and start your feature presentation. As mentioned, we are the official podcast of Foot and Friends on Film.com, where our motto is any film you haven't seen is a new experience. John's chosen his list of the greatest 15 lead actor performances in cinematic history. So without further ado, please welcome John H. Foote. All right, so we're here today to talk about the 15 greatest lead actor performances in cinematic history. We're going to get started, though, with some honorable mentions because not everything made the cut, but these things are worth mentioning. So, John, I'm just going to throw to you and talk about some people who didn't make the top 15. It's all yours.
Sure. Initially, when I made my first list, my first pass, it was 75 performances. And I knew I had to take it down to 15, and I got it to 15, and there were still, 10 that I wanted to mention. I managed to get it down to 7 that I'm going to mention. So these are just, runners up that could be anywhere from, 16, 17, whatever. Sean Penn in Mystic River, which is just an astonishing performance, merging anger, grief, rage, and pain all into one. He runs the gamut of emotions here, and it's such a powerful piece of acting. You just can't take your eyes off the guy throughout the movie, and it won him his first Academy Award, richly deserved.
Yeah, and he's terrifying.
He is terrifying. He is, but he's also so filled with pain when he's trying to get to that pit to see his daughter, and the cops are holding him back, and that's for real. It took 7 or 8 guys to hold him back. It was just, the guy is just so powerfully built, and he gave it all he had. Next would be Tom Hanks in Forrest Gump. Anybody that trashes Forrest Gump gets an awful Wrath of John discussion, because Tom Hanks' performance in Forrest Gump is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. From the speech pattern to that body language to everything about the performance is just spectacular. That same year, Morgan Freeman gave a great performance. That's on my list in The Shawshank Redemption. This role was written for a redheaded Irishman, but Frank Darabont, the filmmaker, decided he wanted the best actor available and grabbed Morgan Freeman, and he made it his own. He'd been Oscar nominated already for Street Smart and Driving Daisy, but this is the quintessential Morgan Freeman performance. This will be the one he's remembered for.
It also is, it sort of, I think, started the trend of having him as the go-to narrator in films.
It did. You're absolutely right. It did. And he's got that beautiful voice, and he's very eloquent. And, he's played the president, I don't know how many times. He's played God, and he's played, the higher power. But in this one, he's just down and out. He's gritty. He's a life criminal. And he knows it, and he meets a guy, and he finds hope. He learns how to hope and how to dream, and it's just a breathtaking piece of acting. Next would be Daniel Day-Lewis for his first Academy Award winner, My Left Foot, and this caused me a lot of trouble, putting this down the list so far, because it's a phenomenal piece of acting from one of the greatest actors in the movies. He's got 2 other movies, but I would be remiss if I didn't name My Left Foot. He plays Christy Brown, the Irish artist who was born with cerebral palsy, and learn how to paint, how to write, how to do everything with his left foot. And he had a mind that just burned all the time. It was intensely active. And Day-Lewis uses his eyes so fiercely in this movie. You always know what he's thinking. And you feel his anger and his rage throughout the movie, both at his plight and about what's happening around him. Next would be the only performance on the list before 1946, James Stewart in It's a Wonderful Life. I'm a big believer that before Marlon Brando, James Stewart was the best actor in American film, and this is his best performance. He had just gotten back from the war. People forget that James Stewart was a fighter, but he shot down 21 enemy aircraft, 21 kills, and was going back for more when they said, no, enough. You know, the odds are against you now. But a fearless guy. And that darkness was in this character for the first time. We'd never seen Jimmy Stewart this dark, this caustic, this angst-filled before. And it's a brilliant film. Unfortunately, it's kind of become recognized as a Christmas movie, which it's absolutely not. It's a great character study and a great study of life and, of hope and of dreams. And the last runner-up, Jack Nicholson, The Last Detail. Nicholson, we could do a list of 15 just for Nicholson, but he's on the list as well. But he's here for The Last Detail. He plays Badass Badusky, a lifetime sailor in the American Navy who escorts a young guy to prison, to the brig for 8 years for stealing a donation box. And in the weekend that he has him, he's going to show him a good time. And he does just that. It's profane, it's vulgar, it's loud, he's obnoxious, but he's also a really decent human being on the inside, and was a real star-making performance for Nicholson.
All right, cool. Couple that just came to mind for me last minute. We just did a podcast on Christian Bale, but it does worth mentioning the massive talent that he is. Films like Hostiles and Vice, where he plays Dick Cheney, really remarkable performances. Shows what an absolute chameleon he is. I wanted to mention Jim Carrey as Andy Kaufman in Man on the Moon.
Yeah, he's another one. He was in the probably down to 30 when I had to cut Mr. Carey, but yeah, he was wonderful in that. And you mentioned before we come on, Bruno Ganz as Hitler in Downfall. A brilliant piece of acting. How do you humanize Adolf Hitler? Well, you watch Bruno Ganz, and he manages to do it. He should have won the Academy Award that year.
Yeah, and something that probably won't come as a surprise to our listeners, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the brilliant work done by Andy Serkis as Caesar the chimpanzee in the rebooted Planet of the Apes movies. Played the role 3 times via performance capture. In the first movie, he only says a handful of words, and it's mostly just physical acting. In the second film, he is a little more vocal, but mostly sign language. And then he's fully vocal by War for the Planet of the Apes. And I think every single one of those performances was worthy of a Best Actor Oscar nomination. I think Andy Serkis is one of the biggest unsung heroes in the world of cinema today. I think he's brilliant, and I hope one day he gets Academy recognition.
I'm sure he will.
All right, now that we've gotten that out of the way, we're going to get right to it. Coming in at number 15, someone we've talked about recently, Sean Penn as Harvey Milk in Milk.
Yeah, this one, Sean Penn, his second Academy 5 years. He was cast, aghast. They said Harvey Milk was about hope and about happiness and about life. And the guy just burst with life within him. It's such a force, and Sean Penn is such a dark guy. I've been up close and personal with Sean Penn, and yeah, he is a dark guy. But there's a real decent, hopeful guy and all that too. A father, a husband, and a hugely decent man. He absolutely loses himself in Harvey Milk. There's no trace of Sean Penn at all in the film. He's gone. This is Harvey Milk, and he says constantly through the film, "You gotta have hope. You gotta have hope." And he explores what Harvey Milk was, not just as a gay icon, but as a human being and a symbol of hope for young homosexuals across the country. There's a sequence with him getting a call from a kid from Minnesota who's going to kill himself because he's gay and in a wheelchair and he doesn't know what to do. And the boy ends up in San Francisco. He comes to San Francisco to be gay, as so many did. And Harvey Milk embraced them, made a community for them on Castro Street. And it's a remarkable piece of acting. His major competition that year was Mickey Rourke in The Wrestler, which was a good performance. Question was on the comeback and gave a tremendous performance in the movie. But Sean Penn absolutely deserved the Academy Award for this. And I should mention, he won everything. He won the New York Film Critics, the LA Critics, and the National Society. It's one of the most acclaimed performances in movie history.
And I remember that scene you're talking about when he's on the phone and how he says to the kid, "You are not sick, you are not wrong, and God does not hate you."
That's right.
I think something that's also quite remarkable about Sean Penn as Harvey Milk is just the juxtaposition when you hold it up against his role in Mystic River, how drastically and diametrically opposed those two characters are in the way they behave. And it just shows the massive range and talent of Sean Penn.
Whenever I hear somebody say that Sean Penn has range, I demand of them, go watch Fast Times at Ridgemount High. Follow that with that close range. Follow that with Dead Man Walking. Then Mystic River, then Milk. Then pull your head out of your ass and come back to me and talk about Sean Penn for real.
Yeah, 100% agree. One of the best out there. Please check out our podcast on Sean Penn that we just posted recently. We got a whole show dedicated to him. Coming in at number 14 is a performance that should have won the Academy Award for Best Actor, and it's remarkable because it features an actor who's largely doing all the heavy lifting by himself. We're talking about Tom Hanks in Castaway.
I remember seeing this, the press screening, and I went home and told my wife, "I'm taking you to see Castaway on the weekend." And I did, and she loved it as much as I did. Tom, this is virtually a one-man show. Helen Hunt has a small part, and a few other actors are seen. But once the plane goes down, the FedEx plane goes down, stranding him on an island, it's Tom Hanks, and that's it. You know, eventually he befriends a volleyball, Wilson, but that's really so he doesn't go out of his mind. And I think what's extraordinary about this movie is just the commitment Tom has been to it. He shepherded this project right so story, and he did. He helped with the script, and then he backed off while they went away and worked on the script. He showed it to his buddy Bob Zemeckis, and off they went to make the film. They filmed the early scenes on the island first, because then Tom Hanks had to go and lose a ton of weight to play the leaner Chuck in the scenes where he's been on the island for 4 years. And there's a brilliant cut where he knocks out a decayed tooth with a skate and passes out, and we cut. And we see a fish swimming in the water, and a spear goes through the fish. And he pulls the fish up, and we pan up from his feet to his head. And he's lean and tanned and dirty. And he looks like primal man. And he pulls this fish up and starts eating it raw. That's what it's come to. That's how he survived, by doing anything. And it's, you know, he's entertaining, it's dramatic, it's heartbreaking. It's got everything a great performance should have. And for my money, Tom Hanks should have been the first man to win 3 Academy Awards for Best Actor for this performance. But incredibly, he lost to Russell Crowe in Gladiator. And I will never understand that. I like Gladiator. I think it's a good movie. I think Crowe is great in it. But it was a makeup award. He should have won the year before for The Insider. So they gave it to him for Gladiator instead. And one of the great injustices in movies. And further, Castaway was nominated for just 2 Academy Awards, Best Actor and Best Sound Effects Editing. And it was easily one of the 5 best movies I saw in that year.
Yeah, I always sort of have the same thing to say about that year. Like you said, Gladiator. We all love Gladiator. I think it's a great movie. I think Russell Crowe was really great in it. But essentially, Russell Crowe just played a badass. Tom Hanks made me cry for a volleyball.
Yes, he did. He loses. When he loses Wilson, he loses probably the best friend he ever had and ever will have. And he knows it. You know, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and what a brilliant plot device to have that volleyball for him to talk.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Moving on, we have another performance that should have won the Academy Award for Best Actor, but it was another situation where a different actor won it for performances long past. We're talking about Denzel Washington in Malcolm X.
Spike Lee had been very vocal about making the film about Malcolm X, and when it was announced by Warner Brothers that Norman Jewison would direct it, Spike Lee, as he's known to do, became more vocal, saying, what does a white Canadian director know about the Black experience? And Norman Jewison, to his credit, sat down and said, you know what, he's right. He's right. What the hell am I doing making this movie? So Spike Lee stepped in. And he ran into all kinds of trouble with Warner Brothers. They wouldn't give him enough money. He went to Oprah Winfrey, Michael Jordan, Bill Cosby, and got the money to finish the movie. And this 3-hour epic about Malcolm X is one of the great screen biographies of all time because it's honest, because it has the courage to show that Malcolm X at one point in his life was a petty criminal. He wasn't a good man. The evolution of him to Malcolm X, the civil rights leader in the 60s, is extraordinary. And there are moments in the film where you swear you're watching a colored documentary. Denzel Washington is so far under the skin of this guy, he's as much Malcolm X as Malcolm X was. Not just the speech pattern, but the body language, the way he spoke with his hands, that laser look he would give people when they offended him when asking a question. Just a remarkable piece of acting. He carries this movie on his shoulders from beginning right through to the assassination sequence. And he won the New York Film Critics Award. He won the National Society of Film Critics Award. The Academy nominated him, again, one of 2 measly nominations the movie got. The other was for costume design. And they give it to Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman, which to me was criminal, downright criminal.
Hoorah!
Oh,
yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I want to mention just a little piece of movie trivia. There's a movie called The Hurricane about Reuben Hurricane Carter, which stars Denzel Washington and was directed by Norman Jewison. And in that film, the character of Reuben Carter has a poster of Malcolm X in his jail cell, and it's actually a poster of Denzel Washington as Malcolm X.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And the problem with that movie was exactly what Spike Lee worried about. You know, it was a white director telling a black man's story. And Norman Jewison spent so much time showing how the white people saved the black guy. It was inferior because the actors, everybody other than Denzel Washington in The Hurricane, is dreadful. But Washington gives a towering performance again, you know, as Reuben Carter. But everyone around him is just disastrous.
Moving on to number 12, I know you love Westerns. It was a real privilege to be able to watch Hostiles with you at TIFF. And you've mentioned that perhaps Christian Bale should star in a remake of the movie we're going to talk about. But of course, we're talking about John Wayne in The Searchers, 1956.
And I know some people will go, John Wayne, are you kidding? John Wayne in the greatest movie list? Absolutely. And I quote, to me, John Wayne was the greatest movie actor that ever lived. Nobody else brought absolute truth to every part they ever played. Don't entirely. I don't believe he was the greatest movie actor ever, but he was woefully misjudged as an actor for most of his career. You don't last 40 years in the business without having some talent. He was at his best in Westerns, no question. And I was once attacked in a classroom by an idiot professor who said, John Wayne, you think John Wayne could do Shakespeare? And I immediately threw back at him, no. You think Laurence Olivier could do a Western? And ended. Argument over.
Nice.
John Wayne's performance as Ethan Edwards in The Searchers is the best thing he ever did. And he was actually cast against type. He's not the good guy in this movie. He's a racist, hateful maniac who does indeed go to avenge his brother's family. His brother's family is massacred, except the 2 girls who were taken by the Indians to be raised as women among the Indians. And he goes after them. But we learn over the course of the time, it takes 9 years for the search. He's not looking for Debbie to find her and take her home. He's going to kill her because she's now living with a buck, as he calls him. He finds the first girl, raped and murdered in a canyon, buries her in his jacket, and continues looking on for Debbie. When he finally finds her, he lifts her up high over his head like he did when she was a little girl at the beginning of the film, and then sweeps her into his arms, looks at her, and whispers to her, "Let's go home, Debbie." Face to face with her, he can't kill his own blood. He can't do it. And it instantly moves you. It brings you to tears, and it's a perfect ending. The very end of the film, everybody else goes into the house, and we're in the house looking out, and Wayne can't come in. He turns and wanders away, forever wandering, like the Indians he talks about, not quite able to connect with society. It's a stunning performance, absolutely ferocious, and wasn't even nominated for an Academy Award, which is, to me, one of the great crimes of Academy history.
Coming in at number 11, we have Robert De Niro as Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver.
And a lot of people think, well, this maybe should be higher on the list. And yeah, you're probably right. But when you go through the rest of what I got, what do you move? As Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver, Robert De Niro is like a time bomb. We see him at the beginning of the film applying for a job as a cabbie because he can't sleep. And when he goes home, he sleeps in fetal position for a couple hours, then spends most of his day in a porno theater watching hardcore XXX movies. He drives in the worst parts of New York at night. And this was pre-Giuliani New York. This was before it was cleaned up and became a theme park city. This is when Times Square was an open sewer of prostitutes, pimps, and drug dealers. And he decides he's going to clean it up. And what that means is he's going to assassinate a political candidate. But when that fails, he instead slaughters a bunch of pimps that are pimping out a 12-year-old prostitute played by Jodie Foster that he's befriended. We know that what he does is cold-blooded murder. We know it. We see it. And yet he's elevated to status of hero by the media. And at the end of the film, a girl that he knows gets into the cab, takes a ride with him, and we catch his eyes in the rearview mirror. He's ticking again. He's going to do it again. There's no doubt in our mind that Travis will go off again. And it firmly established Robert De Niro as one of America's greatest actors. He won the Academy Award for The Godfather Part 2 for Best Supporting Actor. He was nominated for Taxi Driver for Best Actor. He won all the critics awards, the New York Film Critics, the LA Film Critics, the National Society, but he lost the Oscar to Peter Finch in Network, which two things come into play there. Peter Finch had died, and second, it's a supporting role. It's not a lead, but they nominated him for lead, and he won the award. It should have gone to De Niro.
We're now entering the top 10 with our first appearance on this list from Marlon Brando in On the Waterfront.
I could have put 5 Brando performances on the list, but I restrained myself and put 2. On the Waterfront is often regarded as the pinnacle of American acting in the 1950s, and I quite agree. He plays Terry Malloy, an ex-boxer who had worked for the mob and was told to take a dive. He did, and it ruined his career, and he now works on the docks, a cushy job working on the docks for the mob. He realizes through the course of the film that he was betrayed by both his brother and the head of the union, the number one mob guy, Johnny Friendly, and he's not happy about it. He lashes back and wants all the corruption, all the cruelty on the docks to stop. It's got a scene in the back of a taxi cab that might be the greatest scene in movie history. I think it's surpassed by one. But he talks to his brother, played by Rod Steiger, and it's one of the greatest give and takes of acting I've ever seen. They're listening to each other, they're talking to each other, and they're feeling what each other is saying. And Brando has that remarkable moment where he rages at his brother. I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been a somebody instead of a bum, which is what I am, let's face it. And it's an astonishing piece of acting. He had been nominated 3 consecutive years for the Oscar for Streetcar Named Desire, Viva Zapata, and Julius Caesar. They finally gave it to him for On the Waterfront. And again, it's recognized as one of the great film performances of all time.
Coming in at number 9, we have our first appearance on the list from a man who many believe is the greatest actor of all time. This is the only performance in a Steven Spielberg movie to win an Academy Award, and it's utterly remarkable. We're talking about Daniel Day-Lewis in Lincoln.
I have to correct you, Nick. I apologize. Mark Rylance won an Academy Award in Bridge of Spies.
Oh, right. Okay, so it was true for a couple of years.
Yes, yes.
Okay, my mistake. Sorry about that.
This had been in production for a long time. It took years to write. It was based on a great book called Team of Rivals. And Spielberg and his screenwriter, Tony Kushner, couldn't figure out what part of his life to cover. And at one point, he even considered making a miniseries for HBO. But Kushner finally licked the screenplay. Liam Neeson had long been cast as Lincoln, but was now too old to do the part. So Spielberg went after Daniel Day-Lewis. And it took a good long time to get a meeting with Day-Lewis. And then Day-Lewis said to Spielberg, I need a year to prepare. And Spielberg was crestfallen. He was ready to go. They were ready to go in a month. But Day-Lewis held fast. He wanted that year. And I'm sure Steven Spielberg realized it was worth it. He went away and he read everything he could find on Lincoln. He went to the places Lincoln had spoke and tried to find things about his voice because there's no recordings of Lincoln. And in a couple of books, he realized that Lincoln's voice was described as high and reedy, that it swept across a crowd much better than a low rumbling voice would. In the first few moments of Lincoln, he's talking to two black soldiers, and it hits you about 30 seconds into the movie. You're not watching Daniel Day-Lewis. That's Abraham Lincoln before you. And it's absolutely remarkable. As far as I'm concerned, Lincoln died a long, long time before I was even born. But as far as I'm concerned, I've seen Abraham Lincoln, and it was as portrayed by Daniel Day-Lewis in Steven Spielberg's brilliant, brilliant film, Lincoln, which should have won Best Picture, should have won Best Director, and did win Best Actor for Daniel Day-Lewis, and every other acting award that year, I should add.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that it should have won those awards. And I think you're right. It's even though we don't have recordings of Lincoln, just 5 seconds into this performance, as a matter of absolute certainty that that's exactly how Lincoln sounded and moved and talked. It was the American $5 bill come to life.
Absolutely. And he captures, Lincoln was a brilliant politician, no question. But like every politician, he wheeled and dealed behind the scenes. And I love that the movie showed that and also showed his melancholy. He was a sad man. His wife was manic depressive, and he had to deal with that all the time. He lost his son, which nearly killed him, nearly destroyed him. And that's why he didn't want his other boy to go into the military. He couldn't bear the death of another child. And Day-Lewis put all that on his shoulders. And we felt the extreme weight of everything Lincoln was dealing with. And then you add to that the fact America had been torn apart by the Civil War. And he's doing his best to put it back together and abolish slavery. And stunning, absolutely stunning film, and anchored by a brilliant performance from Day-Lewis.
I also think Tommy Lee Jones should have taken the Oscar for supporting actor for this film.
I don't disagree. I'm a huge Tommy Lee Jones fan, and he's superb, absolutely superb as Thaddeus Stevens. Just a great, great performance.
Another thing that's remarkable about this film is that it has all the trappings of what could be a dry and drab sort of film. It's 3 hours long, and it's bleak, and it's men in drab clothing, in drab rooms, sitting and talking with massive amounts of dialogue, and it is absolutely riveting start to finish.
Completely watchable, and that's Spielberg's doing. It's largely in his casting. There's so many great character actors in this movie, people that have gone on to major careers. Adam Driver shows up in this movie.
Yeah.
And he's just it's almost a who's who of fine young character actors from Hollywood. And all perfectly cast. The faces match the time. And you're right, it could have been a very dry history lesson, but it never is. It never is. It's entertaining. And I learned so much about Lincoln in this film. It was educational without ever being dull.
Yeah, and like you said, what a cast. You see these faces pop up: Michael Stuhlbarg, Tim Blake Nelson, David Strathairn, Adam Driver. Just remarkable.
Absolutely.
Coming in at number 8, we have this actor's greatest performance, one that should have won him the Academy Award for Best Actor, and it's from the best film ever made. We're talking about Al Pacino as Michael Corleone in The Godfather Part 2.
Yeah, Pacino was robbed of the Oscar in 1974. I will never understand it. His performance is so understated and so internalized, and yet he's just coiled with such fury throughout the movie. Michael didn't want to ever be part of the family business, yet when the threats to his father continued in the first film, he took the men out, he killed them, and he was groomed to be the Don. And now with his father gone, he is the Don. They've been transplanted to Las Vegas, and the Corleone family is the most wealthiest and most powerful mafia family in the United States. And we get a glimpse of maybe that reaches further when Michael goes to Cuba, and the Jewish gangster Hyman Roth says to him, "Mike, we're bigger than U.S. Steel." But he's betrayed. He's betrayed by someone within his family, and he can't believe it when it turns out to be his older brother, Fredo, who has been festering and raging that he was passed over. And there's that phenomenal moment in the ballroom where he violently grabs Fredo and kisses him, full in the mouth, and says to him, "I know it was you, Fredo. You broke my heart." And then the two of them share a scene later in the film where Michael makes it very clear that Fredo is dead. He's dead to him. And sure enough, when Michael's mother dies, he gives the order to kill his own brother. It's such an exhausting performance from Pacino to internalize so much anger, so much rage, so much pain. And yet he did. He did. And it's by far the best performance of his career. I think Dog Day Afternoon runs a close second, Serpico, then The Godfather. And then you wait a long time for another great piece of acting, Donnie Brasco. But for this, he should have won.
Yeah, absolutely. And for someone who is as big and as loud as Al Pacino has become, it's remarkable to watch the scene where Kay tells him she's had an abortion, and he goes through all the stages of grief just on his face without saying a word before he snaps.
Yep, it's perfect. He's perfect.
Coming in at number 7, we have a more recent performance, Casey Affleck in Manchester by the Sea.
And this might surprise a lot of people, but I don't care. It's my list, and I think I'm absolutely qualified to discuss about great acting. Casey Affleck's performance in this movie is absolutely stunning. It's full of heartbreak and pain and grief, and he mourns for what he's lost. And as he says at the end of the film, "I just can't beat it." He's the father and husband to a lovely family, a bunch of little girls. And he goes to the beer store one night and comes back and the house is ablaze. And maybe it's his fault, maybe not, but the children all perish. His wife survives, but is so distraught she divorces him and says horrible things to him. And he tries to move on with his life. His brother dies, and he's left custody of his nephew. And he goes back to the town where his family was killed and tries to piece together something to give this young man, but he can't. There's an encounter between he and his ex-wife on a street, and she's played by Michelle Williams, and she forgives him. She's moved on, and she asks him, try to find a life, try to find love. And he starts to break, and he says to her, "There's nothing there." And he's hanging on to his chest, to his heart. "I've tried, it's gone. Whatever's there is gone." And we know that this guy is dead inside. He's a ghost, and he'll always be a ghost. He can't beat back the demons of grief. And grief is a terrible, terrible thing. You know, I went through a rough time when my wife died. Losing children, I just can't imagine. I just can't get my head around it. And he deservedly won the New York Film Critics Award for Best Actor and the Academy Award, likely edging out Denzel Washington in Fences, because Washington was absolutely a close second. But had Affleck not won, I think I would have screamed with horror, because it's such a profoundly brilliant performance.
Coming in at number 6, we have a more comedic entry on our list, but an absolutely brilliant performance by a great actor, Dustin Hoffman in Tootsie.
There's a moment in Tootsie where Michael Dorsey argues with his agent about what's right in acting and what's not right. And they're going back and forth and back and forth. And the agent's talking to Michael that he's too difficult, nobody will hire him because he wouldn't sit down when he was playing a tomato. And Michael justifies it. He says, yeah, I was a tomato. Tomatoes can't walk. Tomatoes can't do this. And his agent roars at him, you're a tomato. And it doesn't even register with Michael. He's hooked on the truth in acting. There's never been a better film made about the art of acting. And when Michael can't get a job on the coast in LA or New York on stage, he dresses as a woman and auditions for a soap opera and gets it. And over the next year, as Dorothy Michaels, he becomes a spokesperson for women's rights and becomes a sensation, becomes an absolute phenomenon. But he's a fraud because no one knows he's a man. And all kinds of complications ensue on the set. He falls in love with his leading lady, played by Jessica Lange. One of the other characters falls in love with him. Jessica Lange's father falls in love with Dorothy. And incredible, incredible. There's a moment in the movie where he's dressed as Dorothy. They're at Jessica Lange's father's farm, and Lange hands him her baby. Earlier in the film, we'd seen Michael's reaction to a baby, which was absolute indifference. But he takes the child and nuzzles and nurtures, and we realize Dustin Hoffman's gone. Michael Dorsey is gone. All that exists is Dorothy Michaels. And Dustin Hoffman's performance in this movie is an absolutely towering achievement. One of the greatest performances ever given. If I could have put it higher on the list, I would have. And as time goes by, a couple of them might erode, and Hoffman's performance might go higher. It will never erode. It's a stunning piece of acting. He was nominated for the Academy Award. He lost to Ben Kingsley and Gandhi. Got me. Brilliant on every level.
We're now entering the top 5 with our second appearance by Robert De Niro for his work in Raging Bull.
Yeah, De Niro plays Jake LaMotta, the middleweight champion in the 1940s and 50s in boxing. And it was a very demanding, difficult film for he and Scorsese because De Niro had to pack on weight. And he couldn't do it all at once. He had to do it in bits and pieces before they finally shut down altogether and let him go away and gain 80 pounds. Jake LaMotta was the technical advisor for the boxing scenes, and he said when De Niro was in peak physical condition and training, he could have stepped into the ring with anyone and given them a good run. He may not have won every fight, but they would have known that he'd been there. He later gains 80 pounds to play LaMotta wasted and gone to seed. And the film opens with that, with a shot of De Niro, unrecognizable as Jake LaMotta, 80 pounds heavier. And it takes a minute for you to click on who it is. You hear the voice. And then Scorsese cuts to LaMotta in a fight in the 1940s where De Niro is ripped, six-pack, muscles, incredibly well built, and ferocious. He gives the guy that he's fighting just a horrific beating and just never lets up. And that's how LaMotta lived his life. The opening scene where he's shadowboxing in the ring is the clue to his character. He's fighting himself the whole life. He never can ever get past who he is as a person and what he knows he is as a person. And it's a tough movie to watch. De Niro's performance is punishing, absolutely punishing. He's a horrific character. And at the end of the film, when he's pounding the wall screaming, "I'm an animal," well, you are, and you've been one your entire life. De Niro won every acting award available for this. I mean, after the first screening, they were saying, why even nominate? Just give him the Oscar. It's that great a performance.
Yeah, totally agree. And it remains one of the great sports movies and the greatest boxing film of all time.
And one of Scorsese's finest movies, without a question in the top 5. And a panel of film critics, myself included, were asked to vote on the best film of the 1980s by Premiere Magazine. And this was the #1 film, by far, I might add.
It is a punishing watch. It's not something that's endlessly rewatchable. It's something you experience more than enjoy.
Well, since 1980, I think I've seen the film 4 times. And I'm good. I probably never need to see it again. But it is quite extraordinary every time I see it. You can't take your eyes off De Niro.
Mm-hmm. Coming in at number 4, we have Robert Duvall in The Apostle.
Robert Duvall had won the Academy Award in 1983 for Tender Mercies. And he had written a script called The Apostle about a Pentecostal preacher in the American South. He shopped it around to all the major studios. They all said no. He took it to the minor studios. They said no too. And it amazes me that an Academy Award-winning actor with the stature of Duvall, I mean, Godfather, Godfather Part 2, Apocalypse Now, and he can't get a movie made. And all he needed was $6 million. So his accountant said to him jokingly, God, you should pay for it yourself. So he did. He did just that. He created a company called Butcher's Run and financed the movie himself, directed it, wrote it, produced it, and starred in it. And he gives a performance that is absolutely volcanic in its energy and its fury. He plays a preacher who realizes his wife is cheating on him, even though he's cheated on her many, 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 many times with the younger man and taking over his congregation. So he hits the younger man with a baseball bat and kills him and flees into the swamps and the forests of the Deep South, where he carves out a new church and a new community before the law finds him. And it's very much a movie about a guy's faith. And this guy has faith. He truly is a believer and believes that religion does him good. And we watch him go about his preaching and his healing and bringing people to his side. There's a wonderful scene between he and Billy Bob Thornton where he convinces Billy Bob Thornton not to mow down the church with his plow and brings him into the church as a son of God. And man, Duvall was something in this movie. As I was watching it, I remember, saying to myself, this is probably the greatest performance I've ever seen. And it's certainly one of them. He won all the major critics awards for it, but he did not win the Academy Award. That went to Jack Nicholson, and As Good as It Gets should have been Duvall's.
Speaking of Jack Nicholson, coming in at number 3, we have what I believe you call his greatest performance in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah, and with the final 3 films and performances, let me say that they're interchangeable. I mean, on a different day, I might say another one is the best, or this is the best, or this is the best. It could be Nicholson is the best on a Friday. As R.P. McMurphy in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, he finds the perfect character to merge with the Jack Nicholson persona. And the only way I can describe his performance is to say it is breathtaking. He's a petty criminal who thinks that if he fakes being crazy, he can be sent to an insane asylum and spend his last 52 days in relative comfort, not having to work. But what he doesn't realize is that state prisoners are committed, and they can be held there for as long as the institution thinks that they should be there. And he doesn't know that. And the other prisoners or other inmates let him lock horns with Nurse Ratched, who has spent a lifetime metaphorically castrating men and bringing them down to less than what they are. And she enjoys it. And she realizes with McMurphy, she's probably met her match. And they go back and forth with each other. And she sees his effect on the other men. She sees them becoming defiant and talking back to her and not taking her baloney anymore. And it comes to a head when she humiliates Billy Bibbit, who McMurphy adores, and Billy kills himself. And McMurphy attacks Ratched, very nearly kills her. He is taken away, lobotomized, brought back to the ward, and his friend Chief Bromden suffocates him, therefore letting the spirit of McMurphy live on. The other men never see him as a vegetable. And Nicholson is perfect. There's not another actor alive who could have played this character. Many tried on Broadway, Kirk Douglas, and many others have followed. Richard Dreyfuss, I understand, was a pretty good McMurphy. But Nicholson is it. This is the greatest thing he's ever done, and he's been mighty good since, and just never ever touched this performance.
We're now coming in at number 2, Marlon Brando in Last Tango in Paris.
And I think what's astonishing about Last Tango in Paris is that most of it was improvised. They had an idea, they had papers, it was written out, and there were some lines written, but for the most part, Bernardo Bertolucci turned the camera and said, okay, Marlon, go. And he did. He plays Paul, an American living in Paris whose wife, a Parisian, has killed herself. And he's racked with guilt. He can't figure out why. And slowly, as he digs into her life, he starts to figure out why. To escape his grief, he enters into a purely sexual affair with a much younger woman. She's about 22, 23-year-old. They look at the same apartment, and incredibly, they have sex. And they keep meeting to have more sex. He doesn't want to know her name. She doesn't want to know his name. It's just anonymous, beating back brief sex. And Brando's performance is absolutely electrifying. He did more for method acting with this piece of acting than he did for anything else he did in his career. He has a scene over the corpse of his dead wife where he just vomits out all of his emotion, all of his rage, all of his anger, all of his hurt as to why she did what she did and how guilty he feels. And again, he won all the Critics Awards. He was nominated for an Oscar, but because he refused it the year before for The Godfather, they're not going to give him another one. And they didn't, but he should have won.
Before we come in at number one, we're just going to take a quick break, do a little news beat here, talk about what's going on in the world of cinema. So right now, due to the COVID crisis, a lot of movies have been delayed. Nothing's really coming out, so there isn't a whole lot to talk about. But I did want to take a moment today to mention the passing of Irfan Khan, someone who's known for Hollywood films like Jurassic World, Slumdog Millionaire, The Amazing Spider-Man, Life of Pi, but who is cited by the media as one of the finest actors in Indian cinema. His career spanned over 30 years, numerous accolades, National Film Award, Asian Film Award, 4 Filmfare Awards. He was awarded the Padma Shri, India's 4th highest civilian honor. He's dead today at the age of 53. Anything you'd like to mention, John?
Just a beautiful actor. I mean, those wonderful, soulful eyes that pulled you in. And the type of actor where you don't notice race, you don't notice color, you don't notice culture. He was a human being and a wonderful human actor. He was so great in Life of Pi. He really was.
Tragic at the age of 53. More news, I guess, will be released about the circumstances of his death, but figured it was worth mentioning. Not really much else to talk about in the world of cinema going on, as I said, due to the COVID crisis. Time to get back to it. So I don't have a little drum roll sound effect, but maybe for future episodes where we do these top 15 lists, I should plug one in. The number one greatest performance by an actor in a leading role of all time, as chosen by John H. Foote, Daniel Day-Lewis as Daniel Plainview in There Will Be Blood.
Yeah, and the first time I saw this film, I knew I was watching something extraordinary. And not just the performance, which is legendary by now, but the film itself. I mean, Paul Thomas Anderson is one of my favorite directors. Boogie Nights, Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, The Master. The guy rarely missteps. And this is by far his greatest film. And I say by far. Most of his other films are masterpieces. So it gives you an idea of where this is in the grand scheme of things. Daniel Day-Lewis stalks the screen like a predator in this film. Daniel Plainview is a man who has nothing but contempt for humanity. He hates human beings and wants nothing more than to rise above them. It's not the greed that drives him, to become more wealthier. It's the competition in him to have more than everybody else. And is he an evil man? No, I don't think he's an evil man. He's not a nice man. He's not the kind of guy you would ever want to be friends with, because I don't think he's capable of being friends with anybody. Even the relationship with a young boy he calls his son is very strange. He sends him away when the child is rendered deaf by an explosion. He abandons him and only brings him back later to give the impression of being a family man. He is corrupt. He's cruel. He's a murderer, and he thinks nothing of it. It just doesn't get to him. For the performance, Daniel Day-Lewis used the voice that sounded for all the world like John Huston, the great John Huston in Chinatown. And you can very easily see Daniel Plainview growing into Noah Cross, the horribly corrupt villain in Chinatown. And when I say he stalks the screen, he lost weight for this film. He's lean in this movie, very thin. and he moves with a powerful stride and is just so filled with rage and hate. It's remarkable. And you can't take your eyes off him, even though you want to. You don't want to look at this guy. You don't want to listen to this guy. You don't want to see what he's going to do next. But you can't help yourself. And, No Country for Old Men won the Oscar for Best Picture that year. And I call baloney. I call There Will Be Blood for the year's best film. And the director is Best Director. And yes, Daniel Day-Lewis is Best Actor.
A lot of people remember this film for the most famous quote is the little speech he gives, if you have a milkshake and I have a straw, I drink your milkshake. But to me, the most memorable quote that I can recall from the film is when he says, I don't want anyone else to succeed. And I think that really speaks to his character.
That's Daniel Plainview from top to bottom. Only he can succeed. And he holds his fellow man in horrible, horrible contempt. Even the guy who he thinks is his brother, there's a constant feeling of violence that could happen between them all the time. And when he realizes he's betrayed, he has no problem killing him. None. The minute he catches him, that guy's dead.
I can't remember the exact context of the conversation, but I was on Facebook, and I think we were talking about the Oscars. It could have been from this year, and someone mentioned another performance, and I just remember someone typed runner-up to Daniel Day-Lewis, and then I commented, and I put that in quotations, runner-up to Daniel Day-Lewis, the greatest achievement any actor can hope for.
Yeah, I think this is his best work. I think it's the best work given by an actor. But as I say, on tomorrow, I might think different. I might think Marlon Brando. I might think Jack Nicholson. The top three could be interchangeable. But today, Daniel Day-Lewis and There Will Be Blood.
There you have it, folks. It's our list of the top 15 best performances by a male actor in a leading role throughout cinematic history. This is the second episode in a series we're doing. We're going to follow it up with top 15 supporting actress and supporting actor performances. John, thanks for giving us the list, and thanks for talking to us. And we'll see you next time.
Okay.
There you have it, folks. Episode number 16, the 15 greatest lead actor performances in cinematic history. Thanks again to John for getting on the phone and providing the insights. Thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. Be sure to check us out on the social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, but especially subscribe to our YouTube channel for this, all past and future episodes of the podcast. Got some good stuff coming up, supporting actors and actresses. We're going to do a Star Wars episode for the 4th. That and a whole lot more. We always like your suggestions, so check us out. Until next time, we'll see you at the movies.